For today's Broncos, actually, meet Isabel Yap, author and product manager, class of 2013.
So I'm Isabel. I was class of 2013. My major was marketing, and then I had minors in English and Japanese studies, actually. So I spent a lot of time both in the Levy Center and then also actually doing liberal arts.
Tell us about your journey at SCU.
My time at SCU, I was a transfer student there. I had actually moved from the Philippines to the States at that time. So it was a really big change in my life. It's hard to be grumpy when you have the California sunshine and like hospitality. So yeah, I would say I had a good time then. Challenging because of the circumstances, it was a lot of adjustment. I did meet some very kind people who just sort of helped me through what would have been otherwise a much more difficult time.
What was your greatest challenge in moving to the States?
Just not knowing anyone. I grew up in a very, very sort of tight knit community in the Philippines. I think the people change was a big change. And then there's also a culture change, which it's been more than a decade now. So I'm more used to, the States and the way people think and speak and act here. But it was even small things like my teachers at school would say, "You can call me by my first name." And I wasn't used to that. It didn't feel very polite to me coming from like Asian society to call my teacher Barry.
Were there any unique opportunities?
So what I really liked at SCU was, the ability to take minors in things outside of my own school. I did volunteering with SCAP. I was part of the Santa Clara Review. It also took getting used to sort of like choose my own adventure rather than being told, very specifically, you have to do this.
Please tell us about your book.
Like I mentioned, I was a business major, but I was a English minor, and I actually took, poetry courses. I took a nonfiction course, and I took a young adult writing course while at SCU. Actually, although I'd been writing my whole life, I think if I hadn't taken those classes at SCU, I would have stopped because I was very focused on sort of like my business career and getting a job after graduation, like the usual things. So taking those English courses was my way of staying connected, I guess, to my writing. And I was very fortunate that my graduation year in 2013, the spring, I applied to this summer workshop at this place called Clarion. It's a 6-week writing workshop that takes place in San Diego. It's very focused on short stories and speculative fiction. A writer that I really liked was going to be teaching there that summer. I decided to apply. Actually, it was a friend from Santa Clara who encouraged me to apply. She and I had met through a poetry class, and she had applied to some poetry workshops, and she told me, "Why don't you apply to some summer workshops?" And so I wouldn't have thought of doing it if she didn't tell me. I went there fully expecting to stop writing after that summer. I thought I would start working and then just focus on work. And instead, I got encouragement and I got a community. And I had some instructors say, we're not going to promise that you'll get published immediately, but if you keep writing, something will probably happen. That was the feedback that I got. So I decided to take their advice. I wrote 5 short stories while I was there in that workshop and submitted some of them after. And then they ended up getting published. Again, as an immigrant, I didn't think that I had an audience in the US. I write primarily from the Filipino experience, right? And so getting the stories accepted, that was a strong sign to me that it's worth investing time in this, even as I started my career in tech, because I also work, full-time in technology. I have a copy of my book here. I always like to bring it. So it's Never Have I Ever Stories, and it was published by Small Beer Press last year, so in 2021. It has 13 short stories that were written in the period between 2011 and 2020, actually. So it spans a very long span of time. Some of those stories were written while I was a student at Santa Clara. So like one of them I wrote, I guess, in my junior year for an anthology in the Philippines. But and then the last one was written when the pandemic was already happening, which is so wild. How it actually became a book in 2016, the editor of my book and also my publisher was actually one of my instructors at that summer workshop. She reached out to me and said, would you be interested in publishing a collection with us? I really have enjoyed reading your stories over the years. And since she was my instructor, I knew that, she got how I wrote. Like I trusted her to be a good editor and reader for my stories. That was in 2016. I didn't actually submit sort of like a finished manuscript to them until 2019 because A, I didn't have confidence, and B, I didn't have enough stories that I wanted to put into a book. I ended up switching out 5 of them based on their advice. I had to write a whole new story. I asked if I could write a whole new story because I wanted an original story in there. We got it published. It was a bit of a weird time to be working on it and then launching it during the pandemic. I've been very, very happy and grateful to have the book out in the world and been so, humbled by the readers and the reception that it's gotten. Usually you have no say in your cover or your title when you're a published author. I'm a marketing major, right? So I understand publishing is a business. It's not purely art. But I was very, very lucky to be very involved in both my title and my cover. It's a portrait of a girl submerged in water, but I wouldn't say she's drowning. She's actually looking right at the audience. She knows something. And then there's some kind of watery creature right here. It's got a tail, you can see. It's an existing illustration. It's called The Serpent's Bride by this artist, Alexa Sharp. Alexa Sharp is half Filipino. I write horror. A lot of the stories in the book have monsters. So I thought it was a very good mix of there's some kind of monster here, and then a lot of the stories are also about women and girls, and the black hair made me think of being Asian and being Filipino too. So I was like, I actually think this cover works very well. It really fits the collection well. So I'm super happy with it.
What were some challenges you faced when writing your book?
In the years after you graduate, when you start working, it's very easy to sort of put aside your passions and your hobbies because you have to focus on making money. And it's a very practical thing that you have to assume for good reason. I have been very focused on my tech career. I was working at a startup. I was working really long hours. It's not easy to be working that much and then in your weekends or at the end of the day and spend time writing, because it takes a lot out of me. My own friends and families too, even those that know nothing about writing, were supportive. Not everyone understands what I'm doing. They respected it. There wasn't another Filipino writing fantasy stories where I was like, oh, someone's doing that, so I can do that. We were writing these stories together, but it wasn't people very far ahead of me. But I used that later on as a kind of motivator. I want other Filipino students to think that I can write stories and publish them. It's okay for me to write stories that have Tagalog in them. It wasn't very conscious every time I was writing. Over time, that's become more and more important to me. As much as it was painful to not have that role model and to not have a well-defined path for me, that is a motivator now for me to do this for other people if I can.
Any last words?
I am someone whose life has been enriched by my creative endeavors and by pursuing things outside of work. To the extent possible, I always like to encourage people to hold on to them, even if it's difficult. I think trying to find ways to hold on to it, trying to believe in how important it is for you, keep it. There are definitely times when you can't. There was the whole 2017 because of work and because I was applying to grad school, I didn't write, and that was very painful. But then I found my way back to it after. I told myself, I cannot work on it right now. And I know that's going to suck, but after a year, I'm going to come back to it. I would really encourage that for any sort of passions that you have. And then the second thing I would say is, I think it's really important to kind of be clear on what you want. What makes the difference in a lot of happy people and successful people is actually defining your own success. If I'm to be honest with myself, not really looking at other people, what are the things that would make me sort of happier day to day? Spend more time focusing on that. You too. Bye.